Hey, it's Ron, and I'm here with
Pat.
And the reason I'm talking to Pat is normally I talk about CRM and SharePoint related stuff, but you've done a lot of testing on projects across a lot of different fields, and testing is something that's often, it's not given enough attention that it should.
Right.
That it should.
Right.
And so I thought I'd ask you a little bit about that. And before I do, remember we were laughing, we were saying earlier that testing is often something, if there's a time crunch,
Yeah.
they'll cut out the testing.
They cut out the testing, which I always find very fascinating.
But isn't it ironic, like if you were in a road car race and you look at Ferrari or McLaren or Mercedes, how much testing goes on with each iteration and each release of an upgrade? It's constant testing.
Right, and I really like
those
that
are
analogy.
engineers.
I
Yeah.
really like that analogy
Yeah.
because it's something that people can relate to,
Right.
is how often they test your car engine before they would ever put it out into the field.
Yeah. There's less time on
Right.
requirements, design, build
Right.
than there is in the testing phase
Right.
for car production.
Which ends up being the complete opposite in a lot of projects.
For software.
We do a lot of more requirements, and then we do development, and then we find out we have a time crunch, and we don't have any flexibility on the end date. So what gets compressed? The testing cycle.
Right.
Where do we find the defects? In the testing cycle.
Right.
And if you don't start testing early and often,
Yeah.
to repair that defect costs you way more money at the end than if you found it in the development
Yeah,
stage.
definitely
So-
agreed. And that car analogy just rings home.
It's very
for me.
well, yeah.
So tell me, if you've done a lot of testing on a lot of different projects across a lot of industries, tell me maybe what about one of your more interesting ones, or something?
Well, yeah, I had one project where the challenge was the criticality of the accuracy of the data, and not just, I mean, every time you do a software system, the accuracy of the data is important. But this one was every single piece of data had to mirror the source system where we were getting the information from. So we were mostly replicating a repository, and when you do that, there's no room for error. So every single piece of information had to be in a scenario, and we had to have fictional data to do it. And once we were completed that, then once we went live, we had to take actual data and do a percentage of verification. So we went from testing to verification.
Okay, that's interesting, because normally when we do software testing, systems live, we go to production, testing done.
Right.
Testing's done before training, deployment, production, rollout.
Right.
But you continue on testing after production's gone out, but you're not calling it testing anymore.
No, at that point we call it verification, that there is nothing changed from our test environment to the production environment. So we didn't find some different thing configured differently and therefore producing a different result. And
you must do it on a subset of the data at that point,
Yes.
versus your use case scenarios are all covered off
Right.
with your sample data before go live. Post go live, your verification testing, subsample of production,
Absolutely.
statistical analysis,
Yes.
95% confidence interval, 5% error.
Exactly, right. But it's also sometimes that you think that after you implement, you're done.
Right.
The project's done, you have the big hurrah, you finish up the project in celebration, but there's actually a lot of tasks that follow past that date. And once the verification occurs and then you have to, if any new releases of the software that you're working with require another regression set.
Right.
And you start the whole process all over again.
I like that. It's engineering done right.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah, and if we can do that, we'd have a car that ran really well.
Right.
To use your analogy.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
Pat, thanks. I don't want to let it run long.
Right.
So, so Pat, where can people find you on the web?
They can find me at pdelizer@knowledgetech.com.
Okay. And it's rondajuicy.com, and I'm at Knowledge Tech.